Sergeant York wasn't just the highest-grossing film of 1941. It was a recruitment tool that sent young men directly from theater seats to enlistment offices, a propaganda masterpiece disguised as biography, and the film that almost didn't exist because a stubborn Tennessee war hero believed his uniform wasn't for sale. Behind Gary Cooper's Oscar-winning performance lurked 20 years of rejection, a director who abandoned his set for the racetrack, a massive rotating mountain built inside the largest soundstage in Hollywood, and a star who literally forgot to take his Academy Award home. This is the story of how Hollywood convinced America to go to war by telling the truth about a man who didn't want to kill anyone. Here are 20 weird facts about Sergeant York that reveal how cinema became weaponized patriotism. And stick around for the bonus fact, because what happened at the Oscar ceremony became one of Hollywood's most unforgettable moments of grace and humility. Let's march into history. Number 20. Production halted because Gary Cooper's smoking enraged the real Alvin York. Gary Cooper was a chain smoker. Alvin York was a deeply religious man who despised cigarettes. When York visited the set and witnessed Cooper smoking between takes, he erupted. York had specifically demanded that no cigarette-smoking actress play his wife, yet here was Cooper, portraying York himself, puffing away constantly. The confrontation escalated until producer Jesse Lasky had no choice. He halted production entirely. Cameras stopped rolling. The crew waited. Cooper, humiliated, was forced to personally apologize to York before filming could resume. The irony cuts deep. York had insisted only Cooper could play him, had personally pleaded with the actor to accept the role, yet Cooper's one vice nearly destroyed the entire production. York eventually forgave him, recognizing that Cooper's performance captured something essential about his character despite the smoking, but the tension never fully disappeared. Cooper continued smoking off-camera throughout the shoot, carefully hiding it from York during his subsequent set visits. The moment revealed the fundamental contradiction of biopics. The real person must surrender control to Hollywood, trusting strangers to embody their life while watching those strangers violate their deepest principles between takes. Number 19. Jesse Lasky forged Alvin York's signature on a telegram to Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper turned down Sergeant York. He was almost 40 years old, a full decade older than York had been during World War I, and he felt too old for the role. Producer Jesse Lasky had spent 20 years pursuing York's life rights and wasn't about to lose Cooper over age concerns. So Lasky committed what could charitably be called creative persuasion and what York himself might have called fraud. He wrote a telegram to Cooper pleading with him to accept the part, then signed Alvin York's name to it. Cooper, believing the authentic war hero himself was personally requesting his participation, reconsidered. He called York directly to confirm, and York, who genuinely did want only Cooper for the role, validated the message. Lasky's gambit worked, but the method was ethically dubious at best. He'd forged a war hero's signature to manipulate an actor into accepting a role. In any other context, this would constitute fraud. In Hollywood, it became anecdote, a charming story about a producer's determination. The telegram still exists in archives, physical evidence of the lengths producers go to secure their vision, even if it means impersonating Medal of Honor recipients. Number 18. Warner Brothers traded Bette Davis to Samuel Goldwyn to get Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper was under contract to Samuel Goldwyn, who refused to loan him out. Warner Brothers wanted Cooper desperately for Sergeant York. They had Alvin York's participation, a perfect script, and no leading man. Negotiations reached an impasse until someone proposed the unthinkable: trade stars. Warner Brothers offered Goldwyn their most valuable asset, Bette Davis, then arguably Hollywood's biggest female star, in exchange for Cooper's services for one film. Goldwyn, who wanted Davis for The Little Foxes 1941, agreed. Davis, who had an ongoing affair with director William Wyler that had recently ended badly, was furious about being traded like a baseball player. The Little Foxes production became notoriously difficult, with Davis and Wyler screaming at each other on set. Meanwhile, Cooper thrived in Sergeant York, delivering the performance that would win him his first Oscar. After The Little Foxes wrapped, Warner Brothers never loaned Davis out again until she left the studio in 1949. The trade became Hollywood legend, proof that stars, despite their fame and power, remained commodities to be bartered by studio executives whenever convenient. Number 17. The production built a 60-ton rotating mountain on the largest soundstage in Hollywood. The Tennessee mountain sequences required something unprecedented: a rotating landscape. Art director John Hughes designed a 35-foot diameter circular steel table topped with a 40-foot tall artificial mountain weighing 60 tons. Over 10 24-hour days, 3 daily shifts of 75 workers constructed the massive set under construction foreman Henry Foreman's supervision, building it on what was then Warner Brothers' largest soundstage. The mountain could rotate into 16 different positions, allowing cinematographers to shoot multiple angles and scenes without rebuilding. Surrounding the rotating section were static set pieces, mountain peaks, a plowing field covered with 18 inches of real soil, deep enough for a mule to pull an actual plow, all anchored by steel and concrete supports. The production incorporated 121 real trees, including 75 cedars transported from Northern California. They created a kit of spare parts, jagged peaks, sheer cliffs, mounted on casters that could be wheeled into perfect compositions. The mountain surfaces were timber supports covered with heavy cloth, then topped with plaster skins molded from actual rocks and mountain terrain. The $1 million set was so elaborate that it contained a 200-foot working stream. Gary Cooper performed on this rotating monstrosity, walking its slopes while the entire structure turned beneath him, creating the illusion of traversing vast Tennessee wilderness without leaving Burbank. Number 16. Director Howard Hawks abandoned set to go to the racetrack, while assistant director Vincent Sherman took over. Howard Hawks loved horse racing more than he loved punctuality. According to daily production reports filed at the University of Southern California, Hawks regularly disappeared from the Sergeant York set to attend racetracks, leaving assistant director Vincent Sherman to direct entire scenes in his absence. This wasn't occasional. It happened multiple times throughout production. Sherman, who would later become a successful director himself, essentially served as Hawks's secret replacement, shooting dialogue scenes, blocking actors, and making creative decisions while Hawks studied racing forms and placed bets. The crew knew, the actors knew, Warner Brothers executives presumably knew, though no one officially complained because the dailies looked good regardless of who actually directed them. Hawks received sole director credit and his only Academy Award nomination for Best Director, despite Sherman's uncredited contributions. This arrangement reflected Hollywood's hierarchy. Established directors like Hawks could delegate at will, while assistants did the actual work for fraction of the credit and none of the glory. Sherman never publicly complained, understanding that complaining would blacklist him from future work. Hawks, meanwhile, collected his nomination and continued attending racetracks. Number 15. Joan Leslie was only 16 years old playing Gary Cooper's wife, matching the real age gap. When Joan Leslie was cast as Gracie Williams, she was precisely 16 years old, exactly the same age as the real Gracie Williams when she began her relationship with Alvin York. Gary Cooper was 40 during filming, creating a 24-year age gap between the two leads. In modern Hollywood, this would trigger immediate controversy. In 1941, it was considered historically accurate casting. York had indeed courted and married a teenager when he was significantly older, and the filmmakers insisted on replicating that reality. Leslie, a talented ingenue making only her 7th film, brought genuine innocence and charm to the role despite the uncomfortable age dynamic. She later recalled Cooper as professional and gentlemanly, never making her feel uncomfortable despite their scenes together. Warner Brothers tested numerous actresses for the role: Jane Russell, Linda Hayes, Helen Wood, Suzanne Carnahan, before settling on Leslie. The decision to prioritize historical accuracy over modern sensibilities reveals how dramatically cultural standards have shifted. What 1941 audiences accepted without question, a 40-year-old man romancing a 16-year-old girl on screen, would today generate boycotts and think pieces. The film never acknowledges or addresses the age gap, treating it as unremarkable because in York's actual life, it had been. Number 14. The 1941 draft made finding young male actors impossible. They cast college students instead. Production began in February 1941, months before Pearl Harbor, but after the Selective Training and Service Act, America's first peacetime draft, had been implemented in September 1940, any draft eligible was either already inducted or about to be, and those with deferments were holding on to acting work desperately. The production team, scrambling to fill dozens of soldier roles, began recruiting students from local universities, UCLA, USC, nearby junior colleges. These weren't trained actors. They were college kids who could march in formation and wear uniforms convincingly. Some had never been on a film set before. Vincent Sherman and assistant directors drilled them repeatedly, teaching basics of blocking, hitting marks, and following camera directions. The amateur casting gives Sergeant York's training camp sequences unexpected authenticity. These young men genuinely look like civilians becoming soldiers because that's exactly what many of them were about to become in real life. Some of those college students playing York's fictional comrades would be in actual combat within 18 months. The draft crisis that made casting difficult was the same crisis the film was designed to address. preparing American men psychologically for the war Hollywood and Washington knew was coming. Number 13. Alvin York refused to sell his story for 22 years, believing this uniform ain't for sale. Jesse Lasky first approached Alvin York in 1919, immediately following York's ticker tape parade through New York City when York mania was at its peak. York's response was immediate and unequivocal. This uniform ain't for sale. For 22 years, Lasky pursued York relentlessly, sending letters, telegrams, visiting Tennessee personally, making increasingly generous financial offers. York refused every approach, believing that profiting from his wartime service would dishonor the men who died, would commercialize sacrifice, would turn heroism into entertainment. He rejected offers that would have made him wealthy, remaining instead a struggling farmer in Pall Mall, Tennessee, barely scraping by. What finally changed York's mind wasn't money, it was patriotism. As Hitler conquered Europe and war threatened America again, Lasky made one final argument. York's story could inspire Americans to recognize that pacifists could become warriors when freedom required it, that faith and duty weren't contradictory. With war clouds gathering in 1939, York finally relented, but only on his three non-negotiable conditions. All his profits would fund the Bible school he wanted to build, no cigarette-smoking actress could play his wife, and only Gary Cooper could portray him. York maintained control through conditions rather than participation, ensuring his story served a purpose beyond profit. 22 years of refusals ended not because he wanted money, but because he believed America needed his example again. Number 12. The film used a Luger instead of York's actual .45 automatic because they couldn't get blanks to fire. The real Alvin York used a 1911 .45 ACP automatic pistol to kill 7 German soldiers in rapid succession during the famous October 8, 1918 engagement. But Warner Brothers' armorer couldn't get .45 blanks to fire reliably on camera. The ammunition either misfired or didn't produce visible muzzle flash suitable for filming. Rather than delay production troubleshooting the .45, the production team substituted a German Luger pistol, which worked perfectly with available blank ammunition. This created a historical inaccuracy. York is shown using his enemy's weapon during his most famous moment. The real York, watching the film, noticed immediately but apparently didn't complain, understanding that filmmaking required compromises. The Luger substitution reveals how Hollywood prioritizes visual storytelling over historical precision, better to show a functional firearm that looks dramatic than struggle with the authentic weapon that won't cooperate. York's actual .45 automatic exists in museums, physical evidence of what truly happened, while cinema immortalized the wrong gun. Most audiences never knew the difference, accepting the Luger as historically accurate simply because it appeared in a prestigious, carefully researched biopic. Number 11. Young men left theaters during screenings and went directly to military enlistment offices. Sergeant York premiered July 2, 1941, 5 months before Pearl Harbor, when America was still technically at peace and deeply divided about intervention in Europe. Then December 7 happened. The film was still playing in theaters when news of Pearl Harbor reached America, and its reception transformed overnight. What had been a prestigious biopic became a recruitment tool. Theater managers and military recruitment officers reported the same phenomenon across the country. Young men would watch the film, stand up during or immediately after the final scene, walk out of the theater, and proceed directly to nearby military enlistment offices. They'd sign up that same day, still emotionally charged by Cooper's performance. The pattern became so pronounced that recruitment offices near theaters showing Sergeant York extended their hours to accommodate the influx. Some reports claim certain theaters coordinated with local military recruiters who would set up tables in theater lobbies. Warner Brothers never officially promoted this use of their film, but they certainly didn't discourage it. After its initial release, the film was frequently reshown throughout the war years as themed programming for bond sales and scrap drives, becoming a reliable patriotic rally tool. Number 10. Gary Cooper forgot his Oscar on the podium after winning Best Actor, February 26, 1942. The 14th Academy Awards ceremony. Gary Cooper wins Best Actor for Sergeant York, beating out Orson Welles for Citizen Kane, Cary Grant for Penny Serenade, Robert Montgomery for Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and Walter Houston for All That Money Can Buy. Jimmy Stewart presents the award. Cooper, in his characteristically understated way, delivers a brief acceptance speech. It was Sergeant Alvin York who won this award. Shucks, I've been in this business 16 years and sometimes dreamed I might get one of these things. That's all I can say. Funny, when I was dreaming, I always made a good speech. The audience laughs. Cooper smiles sheepishly. Then he turns and walks off stage with Stewart, leaving the actual Oscar statuette sitting on the podium. Someone from the Academy had to chase him down backstage to give him the trophy he'd just won. The moment perfectly captured Cooper's persona. Humble, forgetful, more concerned with deflecting credit than claiming glory. It wasn't staged. Cooper genuinely forgot. Years later, when asked about the incident, Cooper admitted he'd been so nervous and so focused on not fumbling his words that the physical object never entered his mind. Number 9. This was Howard Hawks' one and only Academy Award nomination for Best Director. Howard Hawks directed 47 feature films across 5 decades, creating masterpieces in multiple genres. Scarface in 1932, Bringing Up Baby in 1938, His Girl Friday in 1940, The Big Sleep in 1946, Red River in 1948, Rio Bravo in 1959. He invented the screwball comedy, perfected the Western-defined film noir, and influenced generations of filmmakers. Yet the Academy nominated him for Best Director exactly once, for Sergeant York in 1942. He lost to John Ford for How Green Was My Valley. Hawks never won a competitive Oscar for anything. In 1975, the Academy finally gave him an honorary Oscar for Lifetime Achievement, recognizing too late what they'd ignored for 40 years. The single nomination for Sergeant York reflects the Academy's long-standing bias. They rewarded prestige pictures and visible craftsmanship while overlooking Hawks' invisible directorial style. Hawks worked with such apparent effortlessness, making everything look so simple and natural, that voters couldn't see the technique. Sergeant York was obvious. A patriotic biopic with big emotions and historical importance. How Green Was My Valley had similar weight. But Hawks' comedies and noirs, too entertaining to be important. The one nomination Hawks received was for the film where his style was least evident, where the material's inherent drama did much of the work. Number 8. The film earned over $6 million domestically and became the highest-grossing film of 1941. Sergeant York earned $6,075,000 domestically and $2,184,000 internationally, for a total of approximately $8,260,000 against a $1 million budget and over 8 times return on investment. It became 1941's highest-grossing film, beating Clark Gable and Lana Turner in Honky Tonk, Bob Hope in Louisiana Purchase, and even the first Bing Crosby Bob Hope road picture. Adjusted for inflation, that $6 million domestic gross equals roughly $125 million today, making it one of the highest-grossing films of all time when adjusted. The financial success stunned even Warner Brothers, who'd worried the film's religious and pacifist themes might alienate audiences. Instead, those themes resonated powerfully. Americans saw York's moral struggle as their own, his resolution to fight despite his pacifism as a roadmap for the nation. Pearl Harbor's timing cannot be overstated. The film was already successful before December 7, but the attack transformed it from entertainment into necessity. Theaters raised ticket prices above standard rates, charging between 75 cents and $1.10 per ticket, and audiences paid willingly. Number 7. William Keighley was originally scheduled to direct before Hawks replaced him. William Keighley, a reliable Warner Brothers contract director known for the adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, was initially assigned to direct Sergeant York. Pre-production proceeded with Keighley at the helm, script revisions, casting sessions, location scouting. Then the starting date was postponed. Keighley, unwilling to wait with other commitments pending, moved to another project. Warner Brothers needed a replacement director immediately. Gary Cooper, who had director approval in his negotiations, suggested Howard Hawks. The two had just worked together on Ball of Fire in 1941, a screwball comedy where Cooper proved he could handle Hawks' rapid-fire dialogue and naturalistic direction. Hawks was an unusual choice for a patriotic biopic. He'd made his name with gangster pictures and comedies, not inspirational true stories, but Cooper trusted him, and Cooper was non-negotiable. Hawks accepted, bringing his characteristic efficiency and invisible craftsmanship to material that could have been maudlin in lesser hands. Hawks' involvement was semi-accidental. If the starting date hadn't been postponed, if Keighley had been available, Hawks might never have directed his one Oscar-nominated film. Number 6. The film was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, more than Citizen Kane. Sergeant York received 11 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Director for Hawks, Best Actor for Cooper, Best Supporting Actor for Walter Brennan, Best Supporting Actress for Margaret Witcherly, Best Original Screenplay, Best Cinematography in Black and White, Best Art Direction, Best Interior Decoration, Best Sound Recording, and Best Film Editing. That is the same number of nominations received by Citizen Kane, which premiered the same year. The comparison is inescapable. Orson Welles' groundbreaking masterpiece, now considered the greatest film ever made, received no more Academy recognition than Warner Brothers' patriotic biopic. In fact, Sergeant York won 2 Oscars, Cooper for Best Actor and William Holmes for Film Editing, while Citizen Kane won only one for Best Original Screenplay. The Academy's 1942 choices reflected institutional conservatism, rewarding craftsmanship and patriotism over innovation and artistic risk. Modern critics view the 1942 ceremony as the Academy's greatest failure, the year they chose safe prestige over genuine artistry. But in 1942, with America entering World War II, voters chose films that reinforced national identity and moral clarity. Sergeant York wasn't experimental, it was necessary. Number 5. Margaret Witcherly's performance as Mother York was considered so authentic that people assumed she was just playing herself. Margaret Witcherly was born in London in 1881 to a doctor father, about as far from Tennessee poverty as possible. She was a distinguished British stage actress who'd spent decades performing Shakespeare and classical theater. Yet her portrayal of Mother York was so utterly convincing, so completely devoid of actorly artifice, that audiences and critics assumed they were watching naturalistic casting rather than masterful performance. Witcherly disappeared into the role so completely that people who knew the real Mother York said the portrayal was spot on. She captured the weariness, the wisdom, the silent understanding of a hardscrabble mountain woman who'd buried a husband and raised children in poverty without ever slipping into caricature or condescension. Her best moment requires no dialogue. When York announces his intention to marry Gracie, Witcherly's face shows memory, recognition, her own distant youth flickering across exhausted features. It is a masterclass in silent film acting transplanted into talkies, using stillness and eyes to convey decades of lived experience. Joan Leslie later said watching Witcherly was like attending acting school. She made everything look effortless while doing extraordinarily difficult work. Witcherly received an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress, losing to Mary Astor. Number 4. The film was reissued in April 1949 and became the first motion picture adapted into a stage play. After its phenomenally successful 1941 release and continuous wartime revivals, Warner Brothers officially reissued Sergeant York in April 1949, capitalizing on lingering post-war patriotism. The reissue performed well, introducing the film to a new generation and reminding veterans of why they'd fought. But Sergeant York achieved another first. According to a July 2, 1941 press release, it became the first motion picture ever adapted into a stage play. Robert Porterfield, who made his acting debut in a small role in the film itself, transcribed the screenplay into a theatrical script, adapting Hawks's cinematic storytelling for proscenium presentation. The specific details of the play's production have been lost to history. No definitive records of where, when, or how many times it was staged have been preserved, but the Warner Brothers press release claimed the adaptation was imminent. The idea of reverse engineering a biopic back into live theater seems counterintuitive. York's story would seem better suited to stage in the first place, but it reflects how completely the film had captured public imagination. Audiences wanted to experience York's story in every available medium. Number 3. The production team demanded complete historical accuracy because they feared lawsuits from York and Tennessee. Warner Brothers wasn't just trying to tell York's story accurately, they were terrified of being sued if they didn't. York and several Tennessee townspeople, including the actual pastor who counseled him, refused to sign legal releases unless the film portrayed events accurately. Warner Brothers' legal department panicked, recognizing that any significant deviation from documented history could result in defamation lawsuits from living participants. The studio's fear of litigation paradoxically created unusual fidelity to truth. Scriptwriters Harry Chandelay, Abram Finkel, John Huston, and Howard Koch worked from York's actual diary and war records, cross-checking every scene against documented facts. When dramatic invention was necessary, compressing timelines, combining characters, inventing dialogue, they sought York's approval first. York served as constant fact-checker, reviewing script pages and correcting errors. The film took liberties with York's pre-war rowdiness, exaggerating his drinking and fighting for dramatic contrast with his conversion. But the war sequences, the moral crisis, the battle itself, York's turkey hunting strategy, were meticulously accurate. Even the number of enemy soldiers York captured, 132, was precisely correct. Number 2. Joan Leslie and Gary Cooper both reprised their roles on radio just days after the film's release. On January 18, 1942, less than 3 weeks after the film's wide release, Gary Cooper, Walter Brennan, and Joan Leslie reprised their roles as Alvin York, Pastor Rosier Pyle, and Gracie Williams for a 30-minute radio adaptation broadcast on the Screen Guild Theater. The show was part of a popular radio program that adapted major motion pictures using original stars when possible. Cooper rarely did radio work. He found his natural, understated delivery ill-suited to the medium's demands for vocal projection. But he made an exception for Sergeant York, understanding the wartime importance of the material. The radio adaptation compressed the 134-minute film into half an hour, eliminating most of the pre-war character development and focusing almost exclusively on York's moral crisis and battlefield heroism. The broadcast reached millions of Americans simultaneously, far more than could fit into even the largest theaters, extending the film's propaganda value into living rooms nationwide. Radio actors filled the remaining roles, but having Cooper, Brennan, and Leslie reprise their performances gave the broadcast legitimacy and continuity. Number 1. The real Alvin York attended the film's world premiere and then toured the country with producer Jesse Lasky. Alvin York, 53 years old, emerged from his Tennessee mountain home to attend the film's world premiere at the Astor Theater in New York, riding in a fleet of automobiles down Broadway accompanied by an American Legion band, a drum corps, and assorted dignitaries. York sat beside Jesse Lasky, the man who'd pursued him for 22 years, watching Gary Cooper portray his life. York approved. He publicly praised Cooper's performance and endorsed the film's accuracy. Then, instead of returning home, York agreed to embark on a publicity tour with Lasky, visiting New York, Philadelphia, and other major cities. For a man who'd refused Hollywood overtures for 2 decades because he believed his uniform wasn't for sale, this represented a complete reversal. York actively promoting a Hollywood film about himself. The tour culminated with a visit to the White House in August 1941, 4 months before Pearl Harbor. President Franklin D. Roosevelt received York and his wife, accompanied by Senator Kenneth McKellar, Senator Tom Stewart, Congressman Estes Kefauver, Tennessee Governor Prentice Cooper, and producer Lasky. The Tennessee congressional delegation turned York's Hollywood visit into a political event, recognizing the film's propaganda value. York's tour transformed him from private citizen into public symbol, his participation lending governmental endorsement to Warner Brothers' commercial product. Bonus fact: the film was selected for the National Film Registry in 2008 as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. 67 years after its release, the Library of Congress officially recognized Sergeant York as worthy of permanent preservation, inducting it into the National Film Registry in 2008 alongside works by Kurosawa, Hitchcock, and other cinema masters. The registry designation acknowledges films that are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, a category that encompasses both artistic merit and historical importance. Sergeant York qualifies on multiple grounds. As a technical achievement, that rotating mountain, those battle sequences; as a performance milestone, Cooper's Oscar-winning work; and as historical artifact documenting how cinema functioned as propaganda. Modern viewers watching the film recognize its manipulation, the way it packages war as moral necessity, the way it transforms pacifism into a problem to be solved rather than a legitimate ethical position. Yet that manipulation was extraordinarily effective, arguably changing American history by accelerating public support for intervention. The film's preservation ensures future generations can study how Hollywood shaped national consciousness during America's most consequential era. Some National Film Registry selections are preserved for their artistry. Others, like Sergeant York, are preserved because they demonstrate cinema's power to change reality. The real Alvin York killed 20 German soldiers and captured 132 others on October 8, 1918. Gary Cooper's portrayal of that act recruited thousands of Americans to fight in World War II. Sergeant York premiered when America was divided, uncertain, fearful. 5 months later, Pearl Harbor made the division irrelevant. The film that had been prestigious entertainment became a blueprint for transformation. How pacifists become warriors, how faith reconciles with violence, how ordinary men perform extraordinary acts when circumstances demand it. Young men watched Gary Cooper struggle with his conscience, watched him conclude that killing was justified to protect freedom, and walked out of theaters believing they'd reached the same moral conclusion themselves. The Academy gave Cooper his first Oscar for playing a man who didn't want the attention. Hawks received his only director nomination for a film he occasionally abandoned to bet on horses. Bette Davis was traded like currency to secure the leading man. A teenager played a romantic lead opposite a man old enough to be her father. A 60-ton mountain rotated on the largest soundstage in Hollywood. And Alvin York, who'd said for 22 years that his uniform wasn't for sale, ended up selling it to Franklin D. Roosevelt, Jesse Lasky, Warner Brothers, and the American war effort. The film didn't just tell York's story, it weaponized it, transformed biography into recruitment tool. made pacifism seem like a temporary confusion rather than a moral position, convinced a generation that killing was righteous when the cause was just. 70 years later, we preserve Sergeant York not because it told the truth, but because it told the most effective lie: that war is simple, that moral clarity is possible, that heroes are humble men who do what they must and then forget their Oscars on the podium.